Last Stand Hill. Here's where Custer and the remaining soldiers that he had with him fell. The black written monument is where Custer himself fell. Now you ask yourselves, what was this battle all about? I mean, what in the world was Custer doing out here with peaceful Indians? Well, they weren't so peaceful. The Native American culture, when it came to enemy tribes, was pretty brutal and violent, unlike what Hollywood have you believe. But there was a lot of other contributing factors. One, the U.S. economy had crashed. Just another one of our economic crashes. And there was gold discovered in the Black Hills. So the treaty they just made a few years before, well, guess what? It was going to be broken. We broke that treaty. I didn't break the treaty, you didn't break the treaty, but our forefathers did. And came in here and told the Native Americans who were occupying this land, you had to go to a reservation. Well, Sitting Bull never signed any treaty like Red Cloud did, and he decided he wasn't going to any reservations. So Ulysses S. Grant sent Custer out here, as well as other high-ranking commanders of the army, and said, you guys go out there and make sure that they get on the reservation. They have an ultimatum. If you are not on that reservation, we will consider you hostile and treat you as such. Well, Sitting Bull and not just a few followers, but a lot of followers, and probably for the first time in such a mass group of Native American Indians, he had Cheyenne with him, as well as there's not just the various tribes of Okalala, Lakota, Sioux, but other tribes as well were there. Now, they just wanted to be left alone. And I'm not sympathetic to either cause, because it's just the way things worked out. The truth of the matter is, the conflicts with the Native Americans who were here before we took over the land and was driven by this thing called Manifest Destiny, there was just a huge clash in cultures between the Americans and the Native American Indians, and that happened throughout the country. Now, I would say that Custer was under a lot of pressure because he had just gotten his command back because he lost his command. He had to do right. He'd have been wiser to wait for the other troops from other divisions and commanders to have got here as well. But he didn't want them to escape. And he felt that his position was supposedly to guard the south so they couldn't flee to the south or scatter to the south. He's got them all in one spot. Now, unfortunately, I don't think he realized how many people were here and how many able-bodied men were here. Now, on top of that, another contributing factor was not just that they were severely outnumbered, but also that somehow the Native Americans had the Henry repeating rifles, and our soldiers, or the soldiers of the 7th Cavalry, had that breech load, one single shot rifle. So not only were they outnumbered, they were outgunned. And the bad decisions that were made was a disaster for the 7th Cavalry and a victory for the Native American Indians. Now, shortly after they split up, Reno's company went down there, and you see that road that goes across there with the red building down there on the right. He set up a skirmish line just to the right of that. And after a counterattack by the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors who flanked him, who went around him and flanked him and come in from behind him, he retreated into these woods over here. Now, he took a defensive position inside the trees right there. But because there were so many warriors and they penetrated the trees, it drove him out of the trees and down to this where you can see the little Bighorn River down there. And he and his, actually, I don't know if you can see it, there's a white marker down there. He and his troops, what was remaining, fled to go up this hill and came towards us and basically made their way up to where we're standing right now. The defeat and the rout was already in progress. You can see these white stone markers. These are where the soldiers fell. Many of them do not have names. As a matter of fact, the greater majority do not have names because the Native American Indians stripped them of their clothes, took everything that was on them, their possessions, and then mutilated the bodies. So it was, for the most part, on most of them, they weren't able to tell who they were. Now you see the brown ones down there, that is from the Native Americans who fell, and these were where they fell, which their bodies were taken immediately from the battlefield by their families shortly after the battle. But they do have the names on them. Now I want to, from this vantage point, show you something that took place. Now Custer, at one point in time in this battle, became desperate and attempted to go down and catch the women and children in the village. And so he headed down this way down there, and you can see there's markers way down there, all the way down. Now he went down there to get the women and children so he could use them as shields to protect themselves from the warriors who were attacking them. And this isn't the first time he did this. He did this successfully before in another battle when he was outnumbered. But here, not only was he outnumbered, but he was outgunned. And here they knew what he was up to, and they prevented it from happening. So he retreated over to the National Cemetery area. Now from there, he was driven with what men he had left over to Last Stand Hill, which we're about to see. Miles Kehoe, Captain Miles Kehoe, one of the commanders from Company I, who was trying to catch up with Custer, was cut down here. You can see all the markers down there as they were over on that ridge line over there, and they were trying to make their way to where Custer is. And you can see all of them. This is the Last Stand Hill over there. Crazy Horse and White Bow were cutting them down. From a lieutenant in the 3rd Cavalry, it said, "It looked to me as if Kehoe must have attempted to make a stand on foot to enable Custer to get away, because he and his company died in one compact mass, whereas from here on the graves are scattered in irregular clumps and at intervals about like those in the slaughter of buffalo." Red Feather and Okalala Sioux said the soldiers were on one side of the hill and the Indians on the other side, a slight rise between the two parties. At this point, Crazy Horse came up and rode between the two parties. The soldiers fired at once but missed him. And you can see all of the graves down there. Well, they're not graves. They're markers where these soldiers fell. Many of them down there. And even over into there. As well as you can see 2 over there. One there. 2 Native American Indians down there. And 1 Native American Indian over there. Okay, so to get a better view of how large the Indian encampment was, look down here. Now, from where we're standing straight out there, all the way over to there was full of teepees and people. Maybe 4,000 people. Maybe even more. Some say 5 or 6. With about 2,000 warriors. And really, because these were basically tribes that any able-bodied man was called on to fight and defend his family once they were 15, 16 years old. They stopped fighting at probably anywhere from 35 to 40, except for Crazy Horse. Sitting Bull did not fight because he was beyond age. But this is where the Indians were encamped. Now this is what is called a trench or a rifle pits. This is where they dug in. They actually dug this out. That's why it's deeper, and they got that little ridge, and they laid here and shot down at the Native American Indians coming up. There's several of these along the way. Imagine all this covered by Native Americans. Teepees. The Native Americans called this greasy grass. Can you tell why? It looks like there's grease on this. It really isn't, but I mean, maybe there is, but that's what they called this area. They didn't call it Little Bighorn, they called it greasy grass. Private Thomas E. Meter was killed at this spot, or at least that's where his body was found. He's one of the few, these are one of the few that they actually could identify. Private Julian D. Jones killed. And here we have Long Road. A Sioux warrior died here. And there are more down there. Now, these Native American Indians of various tribes that were here had a lot of horses. A lot of horses. And I don't know if you can see out there, but out there in the distance is a little knob. It's about 13 miles away. And the Native American scouts with Custer saw all these horses out here, and they knew there was a lot of enemy warriors out there. But Custer still was determined to go. It was his duty. I don't know that he actually had a choice. The choices that he made, though, turned out to be disastrous. But it wasn't just the choices he made, because even though they were able to, even though they divided, if they had not divided, they were still outnumbered and still outgunned. I mean, the Henry repeating rifle would carry all these rounds of ammunition without reloading, where you had that single shot rifle for the military and you had to reload after every shot, and half the time the thing jammed up. At one point, the soldiers actually threw away their rifles and went to their pistols. Now, you can see down there a couple of markers where Native Americans had fallen. But this is the direction that Custer came from over there to over here. And it was here that he split off and sent Reno this way. Reno went around, as I said, over to there to the right of that building down there, or that closed up, looks like an old fort, but it's not old, it's new. Another Native American down there. A series of misadventures. The clash of two cultures. And the loss of a lot of lives. Now, when Custer divided his columns into three sections, he sent Reno one way, Benteen another way, and Benteen had the pack animals with all the ammunition. And then he went a different way, a third way. We just left where Reno was, and we're headed to where Benteen was. There is a lot of talk about whether Reno and Benteen should have joined Custer. I'm not sure if they could have joined him because of the amount of Native Americans that were there. And I don't even know that they could have saved him. They may have perished as well. We'll never know. Out there you can see a lone brown marker for the Native Americans. And you can see the field hospital again. Here we have a marker, U.S. soldier, 7th Cavalry, killed on June 25th or 26th, 1876. And down over there, Native American killed. Marker. This is called Sharpshooter Ridge. One of the farriers, which would be a civilian who died right here, he fell here. He was not a soldier, but someone who took care of the feet of the horses. Now, this is a image of a drawing made by someone years ago. Now, Sharpshooter Ridge. Up here, there was somebody shooting a .50 caliber rifle. .50 calibers, Hawkins, were the preferred weapon of the mountain men. And so these soldiers were getting picked off from some sharpshooter up here. And no one really knows who that is, as he was on this hill shooting down hundreds of yards away, down upon the soldiers. And there's a lot of speculation that it was a mountain man who had married an Indian wife and was sympathetic to the cause of the Native American Indians. And had taken up the fight against the American soldiers. And obviously he was a good shot. Now, as the battle progressed, in an attempt to locate Custer, Company D, which was under the command of Thomas Weir, who went against orders and advanced his position here, he probably saw the conclusion of the battle of 3 miles over there at Last Stand Hill. Later he was joined by Benteen and others, but the Lakota and the Cheyenne, returning from destroying all Custer's men and command, came after them and forced these troops to abandon this position and mount a defense 1 mile to the south, which would be over that hill that way. Now 1 mile to the south would be over there. All along the way, people were dying. Now this is Medicine Tail Coulee. After leaving Cedar Coulee, Custer descends towards the Little Bighorn River in this ravine, headed that way. It's known as Medicine Tail Coulee. Custer probably divided his forces again into 3 companies, so he could ascend to higher ridges beyond. 2 companies approach the river from Medicine Tail Coulee. Near here, Custer sends back a message to Captain Benteen to be quick. Come. Most warriors are still engaged with Reno in the valley, yet some are aware of Custer's advance. Coulee, a Crow scout, said, on reaching Medicine Tail Creek, Custer halted his command, and here the men rearranged their saddles. He rode to an officer who seemed to be in command of one of the troops and gave him an order. Immediately the troop turned its direction towards the Little Bighorn. Custer, with the remainder of his command, continued going northward, his trail about 1.5 miles from the river. Mrs. Spotted Horn Bull says, across the river I could hear the music of the bugle and could see the columns of soldiers turn to the left to march down to the river where the attack was to be made. All I could see was the warriors of my people. They rushed like the wind through the villages. So, coming from there, this Medicine Tail Coulee, going down towards the river. Horses grazing across the way. Still much is happening in this battle. I mean, confusion, people reacting crazy. And all the confusion Custer's headed down here, and this coulee down here, which is Medicine Tail, this is the part you couldn't see, and he was trying to get over there where that building is across the Little Bighorn, but he was driven back. Now, some people don't know, but Napoleon used to arrange his companies on different colored horses. So here we have a company that is called the E Company, and they rode gray or white horses, which made them easy targets. Now, down here, this is the end of Medicine Tail Coulee, also known as Medicine Tail Ford. They were firing into, the soldiers were just blindly firing into the village at this point, trying to in a desperate attempt to try and succeed in their mission. In the meantime, the Native Americans were coming out. It says, Two Moon said, we hurriedly crossed the river and went up, and some went down to get on each side of where the soldiers were intending to come. They, Custer, came to the edge and stopped. Then almost in an instant, the guns commenced to go, increasing to a roar like a thunder. Trumpeter Giovanni Martini, who was later killed and who was a messenger, said, I looked behind and saw Custer's command over on the flat and Indians over in the village riding towards the river, waving buffalo hides. The battalion appeared at this time to be falling back from the river. Custer's engagement, his initial engagement was right here. Now, leaving Medicine Tail Flats, or Coulee, Custer's men headed up this. Custer and his men, his two companies, retreated up this ravine to your right, known as Deep Coulee. The remainder of Custer's command skirmishes with warriors on the high ridge, half a mile to our right over there. Seizing the initiative, Crow King, Gall, and Two Moons lead warriors in pursuit of the retreating soldiers. Crowley the Crow Scout says, while Custer's firing at the cut bank was in progress, I saw no large body of Indians fording. But as soon as we began to retreat, they must have swarmed across both above and below us, for we had not proceeded 1/3 of the way to the ridge before the Sioux were thick upon both our left and right flanks, firing into us heavily. White Bull said the Indians rode in many small parties streaming northeast up the ravine towards the troops. He Dog says, before fight started, we drove him, Custer, up a slope to a ridge and over to the other side of it. Soldiers were mounted at all time and kept going right along. This is Deep Coulee. Custer's making his way to Last Stand Hill, as we are as well. The intensity increases. The Indians came up this ravine here. And headed over here, chasing Custer. This is called Greasy Grass Ridge. Custer's troops retreated to this area in front of us and to the right over here. Indians positioned themselves along the ridge here, known as Greasy Grass Ridge. Now, archaeologists have discovered numerous Indian cartridges and casings in this area. Curly, the Crow Scout that we keep reading about what his comments are, the whole command was at Finley Hill to your right and front, right here and there, and volleys were fired, and they were fired at the Sioux who were closing in. Kate Bighead said, at the south side in the deep gulches and behind the ridges between the soldiers and the river, I found none but Cheyenne and Ogalallas. So this battle was taking place right here. Can you imagine the intensity of this battle going on? I mean, the confusion, the barking out of orders, the warriors hollering, rant and raving, headed towards them, defending their women and children. How intense was this? Do you imagine the stress level of being fired upon constantly, being chased? You're on the run, you're outnumbered, you're outgunned. Not a position I'd want to be in. Here we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 markers. This knoll was contested by the Indians and soldiers. Some evidence indicates soldiers of Company C occupied this, since bodies of Sergeant Finkel and Finley were found here. Indian testimony suggests that the Southern Cheyenne war leader, Lame White Man, led a charge near this ridge. Sergeant Daniel Cannot says the first dead soldiers we found was Sergeant Finley of my own company. His body was stuck full of arrows. The dead lay plainly in sight, all being stripped of clothing, and we passed on towards Calhoun, finding Sergeant Fickle on the way. Wooden Leg says about 40 of the soldiers came galloping from the east part of the ridge down towards the river, towards where most of the Cheyennes and many Oglalas were hidden. The Indians ran back to that deep gulch. The soldiers stopped and got off their horses. Lame White Man, the Southern Cheyenne chief, came on his horse and called us to come back and fight. And then the Lame White Man called out, "Come, we can kill them all." The deep ravine down there. It makes you wonder if they were able to account for them all. I seriously doubt they did. But there are these markers scattered throughout this area, both from the Native American Indians and from the soldiers. Check this guy out. Cool is that? Breakfast. Well, some people might not like that. Still breakfast to me. Alright, this here is called Calhoun Hill. After separate skirmishes, Custer's command reunites here on this hill. Company L, under Lieutenant James Calhoun, skirmishes with Gall, Crow King, Two Moons, and other warriors. From here, the soldiers could have attracted Captain Benteen's column and the pack train, which was over there, if you remember. A Lakota and Cheyenne charge overruns the hilltop and stampedes cavalry horses held in the ravine to your left. Cavalry horses were down there and they were stampeded away. Lieutenant Edward McGuire says he was a Corps of Engineers. The first stand was probably made by Lieutenant Calhoun and Crittenden. The men and their empty cartridge shells were found in a semicircle around the crest. Calhoun and Crittenden were killed here. Along the ravine up the side to Custer's Hill was a line of dead men and horses. Custer's Hill is there, and you can see all the white monuments. The smoke was like a great cloud, and everywhere the Sioux went. Two Moons, the Northern Cheyenne says. The dust rose like smoke. We circled all around them, swirling like water around a stone. Now, there was no wind that day. The Native Americans said it was a hot day, hot and stimy, no wind. But because there was so much activity with horses and men and the war that was going on, the dust was like a storm. And you can tell we don't know the names of the soldiers here. And you can see them scattered all the way down through there. The end is near, and the intensity of this battle is increasing. It's increasing to terrifying consequences. Bears with horns gave his life defending his people and his way of life here. You can see down there where Custer went down there to try and get the children, and then he retreated up to the National Cemetery, and then from there to Last Stand Hill. Now this is Keogh's flight with Crazy Horse chasing him. The Indian charge shatters the Calhoun defense, or Calhoun defense, and crashes through the soldiers' position at the right, over here. Held by Captain Miles Keogh's Company I. Crazy Horse and White Bull cut down the retreating soldiers who flee northwest. You can see as they're fleeing, and they're getting cut down as they go. Greater majority are in a cluster down there. White Bull cut down the retreating soldiers who flee northward along this ridge in an effort to join the remnants of Custer's command on Last Stand Hill. Members of Company C and L were also found here. John Brooks says, it looked to me as if Keogh must have attempted to make a stand on foot to enable Custer to get away, because he and his company died in one compact mass down over there. Whereas from here on, the graves are scattered in irregular clumps and at intervals, about like those in the slaughter of buffaloes. The soldiers, according to Red Feather, were on one side of the hill and the Indians on the other, a slight rise between the two parties. At this point, Crazy Horse came up and rode between the two parties. The soldier fired on him once, but missed him. This is called Deep Ravine. While Custer was retreating from the National Cemetery to Last Stand Hill over there, some of the soldiers, Company E, moved down in this ravine, down in here. But soon they were overwhelmed by warriors, including White Bull and He Dog. These soldiers, they sought refuge in this deep ravine, but they were killed there. You can see white markers down there, down here, over there. Lame White Man, Southern Cheyenne war leader, also died here. Sergeant Daniel Knipe says, of the 7th Company C, says, riding along the edge of the deep gully about 2,000 feet where the monument now stands, I counted 28 bodies in this gulch. Ironhawk said, we saw soldiers running downhill towards us. Nearly all of them were afoot, and I think they were so scared they didn't know what they were doing. They were making their arms go as though they were running very fast, but they were only walking. Some of them shot their guns in the air. The tragedy of war was taking place. As you can see, scattered down through there and here and over there and all the way down there. Panic, fear, all taking place. The battle's about to conclude as everybody in Custer's command on this side is about to be annihilated. A great victory for the Native American Indians. Now this is Last Stand Hill. His failed attempt to get the women and children over to there, to the left. Him coming and retreating to this national monument and then up to here. Last Stand Hill. Here's where Custer and the remaining soldiers that he had with him fell. The black written monument is where Custer himself fell. T.W. Custer, his brother, right there. A lieutenant over there. Another lieutenant. And this is the monument. Listing the names of the people who fell here. 220 soldiers' remains are buried right here under this monument. You can pause this video at any time. Now, it's been reported by several rangers who used to be here that when visitors came to this monument, this site, the battlefield, that they appeared to be angry after visiting it. Here we have closed hand and limber bones. They fell here during this war, this battle. Now, as I was saying, there was an anger, and I believe they were angry because of the slaughter of the U.S. soldiers. Merciless slaughter. They forget the fact, or didn't know the fact, that the U.S. soldiers were actually attacking the village with women and children and them, and the warriors. Which, that's the way they did it. Now, you can see the monument of the Indian I told you before. Now, as you look in here, you're going to see this change the attitudes of people when this monument was put in here, commemorating the Native Americans who fought here. The Iroquois Indians, yeah. The Arikara Indian says, Bloody Knife says, I shall not see you, talking to the sun, go down behind the mountains tonight. I'm going home today, not the way we came, but in spirit, home to my people. Remembrance of their ancestors. Their Crow country is exactly the right place. Absolutely. Children of the large-beaked bird. Cheyenne. Arapaho and Cheyenne. I told you that Custer had a Cheyenne wife on top of his American wife, in addition to his American wife. And during that, he made an oath saying, I will never harm the Cheyennes again, and I will never point my gun at the Cheyennes again. I will never kill another Cheyenne, in 1869. Stone Forehead, an arrow keeper of the Cheyenne, said, if you break your promise, you and your soldiers will go to dust like this. If you are acting treacherously towards us, sometime you and your whole command will be killed. And that's what happened. Yellownose grabbed the company flag and used it to count coup. Crazy Horse said, we did not ask you white men to come here. The Great Spirit gave us this country as a home. You had yours. We did not interfere with you. We do not want your civilization. Red Feather says it was a terrible battle, a hard battle, because both sides were brave warriors. Power through unity. Enos Forebearer. I think it's important to remember that they were defending their women and children and their parents. Custer acting under orders. Had no choice. Eventually, this ended the Native American way of life, because even though they won this battle, it brought down the wrath of all Americans. Even the civilians wanted to come after and kill as many Indians as they could find, regardless of the tribes. Sitting Bull and his followers headed to Canada, where he stayed for a while, and then he came down and surrendered. This war was a victory for them, but it also marked the defeat of that culture.